Welcome to Devon and Cornwall Microsoft Power BI User Group. Today we have the awesome Heidi Hastings joining us from Adelaide, who is going to take us through how to power up with the Power Platform. A really fun session, so I hope you enjoy.
And I do apologise in advance. As Sue said, I did wake up to a lovely alert from Azure saying I'd used all my credits on my MPN subscription, on my Visual Share subscription. So I had to quickly recreate the demo in another subscription, but it appears that Power Apps does not want to play nicely with that. So I'll talk to it, but I won't be able to demo that bit live. So I do apologise for that.
I think we're just grateful you're up and sorting it out for us. And we all know what it's like when you wake up and things aren't quite right.
So I had fun the last time I had to rewire all these demos up, but we'll give it a whirl. So I'll go through as much as possible. So as Sue said, we're going to talk about powering up with the Power Platform. I've got to set myself a bit of a timer here on my phone next to me, and I'll better mute it so that's not too loud. I should point out I'm a consultant, is my day job. I work for a company in Australia called Expose. We're a data and analytics consulting company. So today we're going to talk about all the integrations. I mean, I looked at this a number of months ago, probably even a year or two ago, looking at the different integrations you can do with Power BI, because I've played with Power BI directly, indirectly, and I thought, hang on a minute, there's all these integrations. Let's go figure out how they work, what they do, and put all the puzzle pieces together, basically. So we're going to look at Power BI with Power Apps. We're going to look at Power Apps with Power BI, the inverse. We're going to look at Power BI and Power Automate with Power BI, Teams and Power BI and PowerPoint. It's quite the tongue twister. But those are the integrations we're going to go through. There are more than that. I will tell you right now, there are more. One of my other favorites, which I'll probably mention a bit later, is Visio in Power BI, which I find really fun to play with if you do have Visio licensing. But it's important to know what is considered the Power Platform. So we've got Power BI, that's our visualization, make everything pretty, or roll it in glitter, as I like to say sometimes. That's where we can visualize all our data. We've got Power Apps, which is low code, no code, although it becomes quite code very quickly. Low code, no code app entry, data entry. So when you're trying to capture data and put that into a data source, Power Apps is the one you want to look at. Power Automate is where we would do things like business process automation and flows. So anything we can automate as a series of steps, that's where Power Automate comes in. If you hear the term flows, that is the item type within Power Automate. And then with Power Virtual Agent, I'm not going to cover that. That's actually now called Copilot Studio, but I'll mention it because it is part of the Power Platform stack. And Dataverse is the data storage behind those Power Platform solutions, aside from Power BI, because we know that can wire up to everything. And from an organizational standpoint, Power BI sits in more in the Azure data world for Microsoft, whereas the others sit in the business applications world. But every time they say Power Platform, it includes Power BI. So put it there. The other things, Teams and PowerPoint. So I'm going to take you on a journey. This is a journey in the day in the life of me throughout my career. So I started off with, say, a Power BI report. In this case, it's an executive reporting on sales. And then someone says to me, all right, that's great, but I'd love to see, what about, can we get the monthly targets in there? It's currently showing us sales. What if we showed sales and target? So we can look at capturing that data with Power Apps. Then they say, yep, that's awesome. What about the what if scenarios? Let's say we had 10% to our targets. How are our teams going to look then? How's our sites going to look? We introduce Power Automate to cover that scenario. And then they go, I'm busy. And this has actually happened to me. They didn't use the words I'm busy. They just use the words, can you send me screenshots of the report? And for those of you who heavily look in Power BI, you'd be like, oh, Lord. Are you kidding me? Like, just log into the service, view the report, grab your tablet, grab your phone, whatever the case may be. But this did actually happen. So we can use Power Automate to automate that process, because why have a human sit there and take a screenshot and send it to someone when you can automate it, and we can do more important things that day. Then we want to collaborate. So with collaboration, we look at using Teams. I see in the chat, screenshot and export to Excel. Yeah, screenshot is the one. Export to Excel, also very common. Then we look at taking the board meetings to the next level. So we use PowerPoint for that. So let's get started on our journey. We've got our executive reporting for sales. Now, I can't take credit for this report. It's actually not mine. I believe it's one that Jay did, and it's available on GitHub, and I should have attributed that on the slide itself. But this is our demo Power BI report. So you can see here we've got our sales, and we can look at that over time, and it's all interactive as we would expect to see. So we go, all right, we need monthly targets. Now, we don't currently have monthly targets captured anywhere, which is why I'm introducing Power Apps. If you already had it captured in another data source, you probably wouldn't introduce Power Apps. But if you need a data set that's not currently stored anywhere, Power Apps might be your friend. So inside the Power BI desktop, there's the Power Apps visual. We drop the Power Apps visual on the canvas, and straight away it says, hey, let's get started on configuring the app. So we go into that visual in more bigger screen, I should say, like we expand it into focus mode. Now, this is a canvas app, and I want to point that out. With Power Apps, there are multiple styles or types of apps. So you got the canvas, you got the model-driven app, and then you got sort of your Power Pages. But with a model-driven app, you can't embed that one inside a Power BI report. So Power Apps Canvas app is specifically what we're going to do. And the other thing to note, with Power BI, your container is a workspace. With Power Apps, your container is an environment. They have what's called environments. And so when we set up this Power App, we go, okay, we're going to configure it. We need to tell it what fields on the Power BI report do we want to send or integrate with the Power App. So you can see here, I select my month key from my Power BI dataset. And then it says, do you want to create a new app or do you want to choose an existing one? So I'll go ahead and create a new one. From that point on, we switch over to Power Apps Studio, which in the browser is make.powerapps.com. It's all browser-based. And we go in and we build our Power App. And now I'm not the greatest look and feel designer, UI, UX. So this is just a basic one that shows the month key, because I want to display what month I select on that Power BI report in the Power App, so I know I've got the right one. And then I go in and enter, have a data entry aspect, which is the target field, just a text box, and then a submit button. So this Power App, and I believe I pointed out on the next slide, double check. Yeah, I do. So this Power BI integration you see here in the tree view, that is basically how that Power App can interface back with Power BI. So anytime I build any functionality inside that Power App, so behind the submit button specifically, it'll say things like, hey, go update the backend data source using the patch command, but also then call the Power BI integration and it's refresh. So that's going to go back and refresh the Power BI data set behind the scenes. So that's where the linkage is between the two. So we've selected the fields that Power BI sends to the Power App. And now we're saying, how does the Power App interface back with the Power BI report? So once we've built that Power App, we save it and publish it. And of course, we need to share it. And be mindful, in my case, I'm using a premium connector with an Azure SQL backend. And the key thing there, when you're working out what backend you're going to use, whether you're doing Excel spreadsheet, Azure SQL, whatever the case may be, I could have put this Power App against an Excel spreadsheet hosted on SharePoint, backed by OneDrive. However, the refresh rate, I wouldn't be able to instantly refresh the Power BI data set because it's an Excel file. So you have to go with a data sort appropriate. So in my case, I wanted instantaneous reflection of the data back on the Power BI report. So we've got a question in the chat. Have you started the Power Apps integration from the service? Have you managed to make it work starting from desktop? Desktop, only ever desktop, Christian, would be my answer. I've never started the integration from service. So I can't actually tell you whether that works or not. So next thing, once we've published it, we go back to our Power BI report and see, now you can see in Power BI desktop here that it's rendered that Power App inside desktop. So we go and save our report and we publish that up to the service. And so now the Power BI report will show our Power App, and this will likely error because this is the one integration I didn't get working before today's start time. See, it does this lovely error, but if I just grab this browser and put it over here, hopefully you can see the browser in front of you. This is, I'll go back one, demo one. Got to get the right report name. Of course, it's called demo, isn't it? Demo. Because for some reason, loads cleanly in the browser. doesn't load in Power. So you can see here as I click an element, so this is my sales. So sales targets, this changes. So we've picked 2020-03, so March 2020. If I go back and click this one here, it'll change it. So that interactivity is still there between the Power App and Power BI. And then if I was to go in and enter a different target and hit the button, now this will fail, but trust me, when this little bar moves. So once that Power App does the patch function, so it'll do the patch, it'll apply the data update to the Azure SQL database, and then it'll refresh the data set behind this report, which then means this visual instantly refreshes. So that's the cool part about that Power Apps Power BI integration, is your instant responsiveness. So if you're going through working with your management team and updating all your monthly targets, you can see that reflected against their sales straight away. Or if you go, look, that target is unrealistic for the team, we can go and change it back and change it to a lower amount. So that's how you can see the two interacting together and get a bit of an idea of what's going on. So I will show you. So with the use cases, the big one is the write back scenario. So it's where if you're working with financial reporting and they want to write data back, now there are other visualizations and middleware. So I think it's Acteris and Power On that you can do that sort of functionality as well. But to do it without a middleware and just using the Power Platform products, we use Power Apps. Anything that you want data entry for that you don't already have an existing system. In my case, I didn't, so I could build it, or the what if scenario. So you can go to the nth degree with that Power Apps design. I've just gone really simple to capture, hey, if I had a different monthly target, what would it be? Now let's take a bit of a detour, because we've seen Power Apps and Power BI, how we can put the two together. But what about if we did it the other way? We started with, we were in an organization working with Power Apps. So we had an app to capture the data. It might be field engineers out in the field taking, water meter values. It might be staff at a store taking a stock take, and they use Power Apps for that. So they've got Power Apps, but they go, oh, that's all well and good, but can we do some different visualizations? Can we look at, say, our inventory stock levels? So let's look at how Power Apps works. So with Power Apps, the visualizations are not really advanced. They do the job and they do something, but they're not great, and you don't get many options. So you can see here the inbuilt charting, pretty basic, a little pie chart. Now I would avoid pie charts like, as much as possible. There's a use case for them, but generally speaking, avoid them. So we've got two scenarios. We can either visualize the data within Power Apps, or we could actually put a Power BI dashboard tile into the Power App itself. So if we look at the first one, if you're in Power Apps and you're looking at your data, so this is model driven, this one. So we can see all our data set there. We've got our active challenges. If we were to hit the visualize this view up in the top, now if you don't have this, this has to be enabled by your I want to say tenant administration, but it's probably considered organizational administration in the docs. So if you don't see this button, make sure your organization allows you to see it if you want to play with it. So we did the visualize this view, and then straight away we get more options, because it's automatically going to go, hey, let me generate an auto report for you, stand by while I generate it, and then it goes ahead and creates a Power BI report. You could have changed this to any other design, but just as a quick, it's kind of like quick insights in Power BI. I think that's the feature where you can say, hey, I've got a data set, generate a report for me, and then I'll go from there and change it how I want. But you can see there we've got way more advanced visualization capability using the Power BI visuals than we do the inbuilt charting within Power Apps. So we can go and visualize like that. And if we liked that report, we can go ahead and save it to the Power BI service, or the Fabric service, as the case may be. I still call it Power BI service, even though it's got Fabric too. The other option was embedding. So if we were to embed a Power App within Power BI, the scope of options we can embed is a Power BI tile, which means it's automatically only coming from a dashboard on the Power BI side. So if we're in our Power App and we say, all right, we're in the designer view, we're editing it, we insert a Power BI tile, and then it'll say, all right, where do I want to get this tile from? So we can go through and say, okay, it's this workspace, it's this dashboard, and it's this specific tile. Now, you could have put an entire Power BI report into the dashboard, but it's going to render really tiny. So you've got to be mindful that Power Apps doesn't have as much screen real estate. It can have like a tablet view or a mobile view. So it's not going to be like a 1920 by 1080 desktop screen, unless you have like a Amazon Echo or something, quite big screen. But otherwise, make sure your visualization is going to be quite small and to the point. So in this case, I've just done a quick bar chart to show my inventory stock, but it might be just a card visual to say, total sales for that particular site. We put that in the Power App, and then we can go ahead and publish the Power App and view it that way. So the big use case when you're doing the Power Apps with an embedded Power BI is, of course, expanding your visualization palette. You don't want to do really basic visuals if you've got options to do more, but be really mindful when you're integrating Power Apps and Power BI. There's 2 different licenses there. The other thing you've got to look at is moving it between like your development area where you're having a bit of a play, and then migrating that to a more production environment and keeping it stable, and then having it so that multiple Power BI report developers can work on it or multiple Power Apps developers can work on it. So you've got to watch out for those sorts of things.
I've
Yes,
got a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so when you say dashboard, I'll give you a chance to have a sip of your tea. So
Yeah.
it is actually the tiles that you use when you build a dashboard that you embed.
Yes.
So it's not the report or not the images. So you create a tile, and it's that tile that then goes in. Because I mean, I never, very, very rarely build dashboards now. So this is like one of the first times for seeing a use for one of the tiles. So it's like, oh, brilliant.
Absolutely. It is just the tile. I would have thought I would have been able to pick, like, hey, I just want to pick a report, like any Power BI thing.
Yeah.
That is either report, dashboard, probably not data flow, but no, it is really restrictive, only tile and only dashboard. But at the same time, this is to embed it inside Power Apps. So you could also say, hey, instead of embedding just a card visual tile or just a mini chart, you could just put a URL that says, hey, click this and load up a separate window. To say,
that makes
all right,
sense.
I'm running around the store with looking at my stock levels. Hey, I want to know more details. I can click the link from the Power BI Power Apps and go switch over to Power BI and see it more holistically. So I think this tile is limiting, but it might be enough, and it might be you put a tile that's just the URL to the report, or you put a tile that's just a little bit of information and then separately put a link on the Power App that says, hey, to go get more detail, click here. And because if you're running around with your phone, you can also use the Power BI app on the phone, but you need to know what report it is from Power BI. The other thing from a security standpoint, I've not looked this in great depth, but because I wired all this up with my account credentials, so that I think the Power BI will render using whatever account I set up the connection to Power BI with. So if you did put a link there, you'd need to make sure the person using the Power App also has access to the Power BI report. So in this case, you don't, because you're using the embedded. But if you were to put a link somewhere, you would have to.
Yeah.
Oh, good work.
Cool. And PBI for mobile and alerts and then the licenses. Sorry. Power Apps licenses. I've never got my head. I only use Power Apps a little bit, more to enter data into a SharePoint list. So the way I use it, I use a Power App inside a Power BI report where we enter data, and then which then feeds back to the Power BI report. All of various things. But the licenses.
That's a very good point. So Power Apps is licensed in a number of ways. You got the this may have changed, so I'm recalling from my memory. It's a per user license or a per app, per user with unlimited apps, or per app license.
Yeah.
Which is troublesome. And that's one aspect to it. So you got the Power Apps license, but then you've got the connector. Pretty much everything outside of SharePoint is considered a premium connector, which comes at a cost. Premium connectors come at a cost. So in this case, I'm using Azure SQL. It is using a premium connector. So I pay for the premium connector, plus I pay for the Power Apps user consumption license. If you've got enterprise agreements like E3s and E5s, so those are Office 365 licenses, Power Apps is included in, I believe, the E3 and the E5, but the connectivity, the premium connector is not. So you have to then still pay for the premium connector.
Yeah.
But depending on what you're doing, if you're just building so there's no problem with building a Power App and backing it onto SharePoint, right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of fun, like even though the user is not accessing the SharePoint site, they have to have access to it. In the same way, if I put Excel in OneDrive, they technically have access to the Excel. So if they were savvy and figured out where it was, they could just edit it in a browser, but want them using the Power App. Now, if you do that, that's perfectly fine. And the integration with Power BI will still be there. The only thing that's not there is that instantaneous refresh of the visuals. But if you've got another way to trigger the Power BI dataset refresh, that's all you need to do. So the Power App you can use to do your write back, and that's still fine. Just I can call the refresh, but it won't actually do anything. But I could go into the data set and make sure it's refreshed, say, every hour with the Office 365 ones. And that way the data's getting reflected. It's just not getting reflected instantaneously. But it means you can still use the Power App and you're not necessarily going down the path of premium connectors. My personal experience with Power Apps gets very expensive very quickly. I looked at a use case for 20,000 users and went, this is going to cost like 200 grand a month just to run the Power App with a back-end database. We're probably better off building just a web app with web devs, a more coded solution and cost less. As people are putting in the chat, $20 per USD per user per month, which even worse in Australia because the exchange rate's terrible. And the UK is probably even worse as well, because I remember the exchange rate to the UK from Australia is terrible. So it's not cheap, right? $20 US might not seem like a lot, but as soon as you scale that, and you're paying for a Power BI license. So if you're paying for Power BI Pro, it's like what, 10 USD per user per month, or premium per user is 20, and then you go and add Power Apps, another 20 per user, and then you go add your premium connector, and then you times that by even just less than 100 users. You're spending a lot of money. And then if your Power Apps is per app, if you have a non-prod app and a prod app, that's double, because it's not necessarily developer licensed. In saying that, if you want to play with it, as I did, I want to play with it, and I'm not going to spend a fortune to do that. There is a developer plan. I think it's called the developer plan with Power Apps and Power Automate. So you can sign up for those, and it lets you trial the features and everything. And usually it says, this will expire in 30, 60, 90 days, one of those categories. And then you just extend it. So I've had this particular Power, I literally extended it just last week. I was like, I want that for demos next week. Extend.
Definitely.
So you've got the option to pilot it without having to pay for it until you're ready to go. You know what? This pilot's looking like it's a go. The licensing is a go. Let's go build it.
Yeah, brilliant.
So if we now cruise on our journey, we're going to go add.
Thank you.
No, you're fine. Interrupt whenever you like, people. By the way, if anyone, you're welcome to come off mute. You're welcome to come on camera. Thanks, Sue, for being on camera, because then I'm not staring at a bunch of initials.
I hate it. I always do, because I always think I don't want people to think I'm doing it, but I know from presenting, I like to have someone that will nod at me and smile and just that human touch, because otherwise you're just talking to a screen, and it's lonely and it's miserable and it's not fun. So I always do, because I sit where you sit, Heidi, and it makes it so much nicer to have a smiley face. Exactly. The black void is this, and I always do say to people, I say, can you, your screen's not on, is there a reason? Like, come on and talk to me. But I think that's just me as well. I'm like, talk to me.
But don't worry, everyone. It's totally acceptable to be off camera as well. I'm not trying to peer pressure you into being on camera in case anyone's thinking that. You don't
have to. If you're not quite so gobby as Sue and Heidi, then be free.
Yeah,
we got
It's like, you don't want to peer in the recording. That's perfectly fine. So if we now look at a Power Automate integration, so same as Power Apps, but a deja vu here. In Power BI Desktop, we drop the Power Automate visual, so you see that in the selection of visuals. So we go pick Power Automate. Now, very much akin to Power Apps here. All the editing is going to be done in the Power Automate Studio area, not inside Power BI Desktop. So once you've dropped that Automate visual on the canvas, it's going to then ask you to go and configure it. So we drag and drop the fields we want to interact with, if we want to interact with fields. And in this case, I do want to interact with some fields, but I don't need to for this, because I'm going to do it all behind the scenes with SQL. I just want it to execute a particular flow. So now I'm going to go in and say, I apologize. It renders the Power Automate service within Power BI Desktop, but you can also go edit it directly on make.powerautomate.com. This will create a flow there, and it'll be a cloud flow. So I want my Power Automate to say, click a button, and then the business process flow I want to fire off is to go update every single monthly target by 10%. Now, for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to make that more like 50%, and click through. And I'm just going to take this question. Are you going to move away from Power Automate a little bit now that Fabric Data Factory data pipelines have the semantic model refresh? No, not necessarily, because if I was using it for Power Automate refreshing only, if I was using it for semantic data refresh only, and I was going to switch to Fabric, then potentially. However, in this case, I'm not using only refresh. I'm actually kicking off a data change first and then going back to the refresh. So in my case, I wouldn't shift this to a Fabric data pipeline. Also, remembering with Fabric, you need to enable it on the tenant, have access to it as a user on that tenant, then pay for it in Azure with a Fabric capacity. And that Fabric capacity starts at an F2, which is 300 USD per user per month, and goes all the way up. And that's if you leave the capacity on, you can pause it and whatnot. If you pause it, nothing's available. So in my case, I want this thing to be available, and I want it to do a simple business process flow. And Fabric data pipelines is more data engineer. So you would want someone potentially who's more of a coder. When I say coder, I mean like not a citizen dev where they do low code, no code, more of a pro code resource. So it really depends on the resourcing within your team. If you've got someone with data engineering skills and data pipeline is within their wheelhouse, or it's something your organization wants to expand into, by all means look at it. But in this case, no. And of course, I can't drop it. And of course, I can't drop a visual on the screen that says execute factory pipeline. I would probably have to call the API, and I don't even know if they've got the Data Factory Pipelines API available to execute a pipeline outside of the pipeline or the workspace itself. So let's go with no, but definitely think about those things. All right, so my Power Automate here.
So much knowledge, so much knowledge. Love it.
Yeah, I like to be a bit well-rounded, so you'll find me go off in tangents all the time. In this case, this is a cloud flow. So Power Automate has a desktop flow, it has a cloud flow. A cloud flow can be triggered by an action or a schedule, and probably something else. But in this case, we get when the button is clicked in Power BI, that is what triggers this flow. So that's what you see here. This is actually a screenshot of the Power Automate flow. So this is part of it. This is what it looks like. After that, I'm going to say from that flow, let's go and execute a SQL query. Again, connectors on this one because it's connecting to Azure SQL. So this is going to connect to my Azure SQL database, and it's going to run a SQL statement to update the monthly targets. Now, I could have gone all fancy and passed data through between the two, but I just wanted to do a bulk. What happens if I add 10%? And in theory, if you did this with, let's say, the what if parameters in Power BI, totally different experience. You probably could do them in that too. I just wanted to test out the integration, so I needed a use case. Once it's run that Azure SQL command, it's going to come back and say refresh the data set. And so it needs to know what workspace and what data set you want to do. And then that is our overall pipeline. So very simple. So I should call it flow, not pipeline, given the overuse of pipeline in the Azure Data Power Platform Fabric world. But we now have our end-to-end flow. And this is going to be inside the Power Automate editors. So we save that flow, and of course we need to share it so that it can be used. All right. Now we've got our interactive Power Automate there. So this run flow button, this is how your Power Automate appears. So I can go ahead and click that. It's then going to execute my Power Automate. It's going to trigger, it's going to fire it off. Now you'll notice it's not like Power Apps where it automatically shows the visuals have been updated. But if I was to refresh this report, I always forget where the refresh button is because, you know, let's not lay it out the same as we would. And you can see there, my data has moved, but it's important to know what is actually happening there. So let's go over to Power Automate. And of course, it's put it behind the share screen tab, but don't worry about the failure. That's okay. That's due to me mucking up my demos. But this is the actual run. So sorry, this is Power Automate. If we come into our flows, we can see we have a cloud flow here.
I think there's something wrong if they were all succeeded. might
That's
never
true.
all succeed.
Uh,
There's always
this
some fails in there as
is
part
the
of the
one batch of
process.
demos that is
Yeah,
not pre-recorded. A lot of mine are
yeah,
pre-recorded just in case.
yeah,
This one isn't, because this is way more fun to do this one interactively.
yeah,
But if
yeah.
I click into a flow, we can see automatically a 28-day history. Now, if we click into this flow specifically, because bearing in mind, for me, it is May 2022 at 6 a.m. That's why it's showing this time. It would show your date and time appropriate to you. And if we go in, we see our flow. And the cool thing that Power Automate gives you is as you click through things, you can see exactly what happened. So I can see that a button was clicked. I can see that it ran this bit of SQL and SQL said, yep, we're all good. It didn't give us any sort of errors. And then we can see that it went and refreshed the data sets. We see all the responses back from the service about what it did. And we can see the timing it takes. So if this ever fails, I'll show you what a failure looks like. So if you go through and click a failure, it fails, it tells you which step fails. And so you can go in and it says invalid data set refresh because there's already a refresh happening. Something to be mindful of.
I do really like Power Automate. I just think when
It's,
it works, it's just awesome.
when it works, it works. And it's slick. It's something that a citizen dev can attach to. And I would
Yeah.
say it doesn't have the same negative connotations as, say, Access does. It's a tool
No.
that you probably want your business users using.
Yeah.
It's not that they can't use Access. We just don't want them going a bit rogue with it. But you can see that I could have put anything behind that button. I could have put that button just to say email the manager to say the figures have been
Yeah.
updated.
Yeah.
It could be absolutely anything there. I've just done a really simple what if scenario going, hit the button, updates the sales by 10, updates the targets by 10%, or in my case 50. And then I just refresh the visual after it's finished, because you trigger it, it runs, says triggering, finishes triggering, come back, refresh, values all moved. Ignore the Power App behaving badly behind the scenes. But that is our interactivity between Power Automate. Stress, better get cracking. So we've talked about how we can look at the flow. We can go through and see it run. Oh, something to be mindful of. I'm a bit security conscious from time to time, but if you go into the Power Automate run, you can see the data that goes through that Power Automate. So if you're sending it data and you're executing things with that data, whoever's got access to see that Power Automate flow, to edit it, to manage it, to monitor it, they can see the data elements going through. So don't think it's like, say, a RLS in Power BI or a SQL Server, either RLS or just the inbuilt database roles. If someone's got access to that flow, they see the execution of the flow.
I find that really useful when you can look at it and you can see, if you're checking that your if statement or your logic is working, you can see whether, I've got the square list of nothing in it, or whether I've got the data in it.
That's exactly right. But people then forget that, hey, if this has got a person's, name, phone number, email, and it flows through, then whoever's editing this flow also sees that. I mean, sure, they're going to have to go through every single record to see it, but it might be like they're processing the, or what are those things people get? Bonuses. They're processing the bonus information.
Yeah.
Question, is the refresh with flow consuming out of the 8 refreshes a day? Well, not sure. I know back in the day, it used to say in the documentation 8 refreshes, and there was ways to get around it, like running PowerShell things to execute refreshes. So I'm not sure if Power Automate has that restriction. I could probably run it a couple more times and see if it hits
I think it doesn't, because it's not a scheduled refresh within the Power BI service. It's almost like you're pressing the refresh button instead of a scheduled refresh. That
would make sense. Yeah.
I'm about 85% okay with that, but that makes sense to me, because it's like you're pressing the button instead of you're scheduling the refresh. But I could be wrong.
I second the thought process there. I reckon that's probably right. Definitely everything needs testing. The other thing I usually point out in my slides, it's not really in this one, but anytime you're doing anything with the Microsoft stack, I'm very much a Microsofty person, so I don't really talk about AWS, GCP, Databricks, even though I know about them. But I'm more, as I say to people, just because when you're evaluating your solution design or you're evaluating the product selection, look at the limitations today, but don't be surprised if they change tomorrow, 6 months' time or whatever. So evaluate them in line with what your needs are and, your 80-20 decision points or whatnot, but then revisit it. So if the refresh limit is impacting you in your design today, in 6 months' time, you never know if it's improved. And also go on ideas.fabric.microsoft.com or what used to be ideas.powerbi.com. I think it redirects anyway. And put it on the ideas forum if there's something that there's not a functionality for you or there's an issue with a feature. Because if you don't log it on those forums, you can't assume the product team knows about it. Some of the product team work quite closely with vendors and community, and they come from industry, and others are more like a traditional PM building a product. They haven't necessarily come from a Power BI report developer role and then gone into managing product development. So they're building products and features through, their vision statements and everything, going, we'd love this and the feedback from users to go, we'd love this functionality. So the more feedback you give them, the more information they've got to work from.
Yeah. They do really appreciate it, don't they? I know they, just from conversations with the team, they do like it when you can feed back to them. Fernando's found out for us, I think it's Fernando, that we're both wrong. It does count towards the 8 refreshes.
Good old Copilot.
Good old Copilot. Thank you, Fernando, for putting us on this straight and narrow.
That's pretty much the daily limit.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Consider going to premium.
Yeah. You can see why Microsoft is so expensive. are so successful. Very successful.
All right, so we're going to cruise on through to now looking at Power Automate. Can we send screenshots of these reports? Yes. Here's a great trap for young players, or trap for any players, I should say, young or old, or in between, whatever you class yourself as. But if we look at the Power Automate with Power BI, so if I'm in Power BI and if I go the other way, if I'm in Power Automate and I'm building a Cloudflow, like new Cloudflow, and I can pick the different activities. So similar to, you can do get data and pick, from 100 plus connectors in Power BI. With Power Automate, you have a bucket load of options in terms of what you want to do activities wise. So in my flow, I drop Power BI on, and then I want to see what can I do with Power BI, with Power BI.
Yeah.
Wow, tongue twister, my brain's kicking in.
Hey, it's you're allowed. You are allowed.
So if we look at this, the key thing you'll note, sure, you can see things are in preview. Now, I took the screenshot a while ago, so this could be actually no longer in preview. But you see nowhere that whether it's a premium only feature or not. And when I say premium in this case, it's premium capacity.
Oh.
So it is right off the bat, a lot of people won't be able to use it. I don't know about you, but I work with a lot of clients who don't have premium capacities.
Yeah,
they may well get fabric capacities.
Yeah, most of mine, yeah.
Yeah, most that you see will use Pro. Now, if you want to play with this stuff, I will do a shout out to Gilbert over at Formu because he taught me about premium capacities and embedded capacities at a pre-con at a I think it might have even been Dfinity. So the Dfinity, SQL Saturday, Data Saturday, one of the events around the place. And so I actually spun up a Power BI embedded, because embedded by its very nature creates a capacity in the Power BI service or Fabric service. So I can actually play with these features to do demos, because I used them at a client where I had, I wasn't a client at the time, it was my actual day job. And I used it there, but they have premium P1. So when I went to create this demo, I was like, oh, you just do this. And went, I need a premium. How am I going to get that to work? So I spun up a Power BI embedded in Azure and then turned it off. So with this, we pick our actions. And so the same as we did before. So in my case, I'm going to manually trigger the flow. This is a manually trigger on demand. Someone says, send me a copy of that report. I have an Excel spreadsheet in this case because I want to do URL filtering on the Power BI side. So I don't know if you've experienced URL filtering, but if you have a Power BI report and you've got fields, rather than use the filter pane and put filters in and say, hey, I want to select fiscal year 2022 or whatever, you can actually do it in the URL. So you can do, it's like question mark, the field name equals the value, and be mindful that it's a URL. So things like spaces are replaced with %20, etc., etc. So I have a little Excel file that says, I'll talk about it shortly because it's in the next slide. And then with that Excel file, I want to load it in and then go, hey, go through and loop on every row. With that row, go and export, go call a Power BI report, export it as an image, and then the send email task, it actually uses the output. Something else to be mindful of with Power Automate, you can take the output of each flow and use it in the next one. Each flow activity and use it in the next one.
Yeah.
And
so here's it's not necessarily linear, is it? You can jump from one, they can, exactly. A bit like in Power Query.
And you can split off and do, fork and then bring it back together. And why use Power Automate to email reports? Why not use subscription features? In this case, it's a subscription feature. Great question. In Power BI Service is more if I wanted a report like every day, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever, and a static copy. I want specific filtered data. So you could try and do a data-driven subscription, but it's not data-driven in the point of value changes or refresh. It's actually specifically, I want to run this report filtered to these values and then copy it and send it out. Whereas subscription is less interactivity involved. It's more like run report, send me copy, or data-driven run report, send me copy. So I've not looked at it specifically, but in my case, it's not like the executive said, set up a subscription, I want to report every day. The specific use case was a political one, in that it was a minister. Was it a minister or a chief? No, it was a chief executive for a government department, and that chief executive was going to visit a school site, and that's not a repetitive schedule. It's they schedule them all with different dates and everything. So they want to go out and visit a specific site, and they want to know what was the data for that site as at the day before they were actually going visiting. As opposed, in this case, my example is more about, hang on. Good point. That's my lounge room light, but I've got that on the app too. So let me just turn off. This is you can't see it because it's going to blur it out because it's not in front of my face.
Yeah.
This is my lighting app. So let's just fix that. There we go. Look, no light. By the way, I'm in my lounge room. My desk is in my lounge room. So that's my lounge room light, whereas this is my little desk light above me. But yeah, so we got our Excel file. So in this case, we want to know what are we filtering, and then I'm lazy, so I tell Excel put a conditional calculated column in, basically, or whatever Excel calls a calculated column. I say, I want to take the fiscal year parameter. It has a space, so it's XO20 underscore inside. And then I give it the file name as well. I give it the file name because I couldn't figure out how to generate the file name nicely in Power Automate expressions. So it's much easier for me to just say, hey, Excel, grab this column and put .pdf on the end. Sorted. So back in our Power Automate, we've connected, that Excel file is published to SharePoint. So we tell Power Automate, go to this SharePoint site, this document, and inside that document, this table. And then with that, we go and take the value. So that list rows, this one, that has a value. That's the record, the individual record in the for each loop. So that value you see just there. I don't know if my mouse appears there, but just there.
Yeah, it does.
Then we take that value, then we send that into the Power BI report. We say, hey, we want to call this workspace, this report, I want to call the export API feature to a PDF. And do I want to give it a report level filter? Yes, I want to give it that URL filter column so that I get the specific value I wanted. And then I say, hey, go send an email. And yes, you'll see me use NCIS characters. I love them because I can remember the team structures. So it's great when I'm testing out row level security in that. And then subject, I'm doing a demo, send this report with this year. Now, the reason I put the values from the Excel file into the email itself, I will show you exactly why on the next screen. But there's a reason for that, and I highly recommend doing it. And then, of course, the date it was generated, so that if there's a delay in the emails or whatever, they know when it appeared. We want to send an attachment. So in the attachments, we take our file name from our Excel input, and we also, the output of that export to file is actually this body Power BI one. So that's the output of the earlier action. And then it goes ahead and sends the email. So on the right, you can see an example of the email. So I've got my FY 2018 PDF, and in my email, it says FY 2018. The very important reason I did that, when you use URL filtering, it doesn't necessarily reflect that on the visual slices. So this is in fact filtered to 2018, but it will not necessarily show that in the visual, and things like Power Automate and Power Apps won't render. So that's why it's got the little X. which kind of looks like the sensitivity label, but it's not. It's just to say it's not going to render those in the export. But that's why I put different information in the emails, because it's using URL filtering. But you can see it's sent a copy of that report over. You can do other things like send it to a Teams message if you like, but it's just an example of how you can use that Power Automate to automate things you do. So anytime you're asked to do something manual, think back to, if I'm doing this all the time, think back to, is it in this list? I work with a team who said, hey, we've got this TV screen. Well, we have a bunch of them in IT, TV screens on the walls. We want to show like dashboards of, say, our Azure cost and things like that. Now, rather than figure out how to get all that connected, they're quite happy to tell a TV, cycle through these images in this network share. So I said, well, you just use Power Automate to take a copy of your Power BI report and drop it in the network share as an image, and then that'll cycle through on the TV, and you can have that run all the time. So it just gives you options, right? We used to do this all the time. We'd get a request from I think it was like an executive assistant saying, hey, so-and-so needs this data from this report. Cool. We would do it. And then I got to the point where I'm like, hey, I watched this demo on Power Automate. I reckon I could just build something. And off I went and I built it. I wrote all the instructions and did a video. And then the team could spend more time doing other things.
Yeah, definitely.
As long as everything's up and working, of course. Because as I like to say, I love automation and I love concepts like DevOps, which is very much in line with that automation strategy. However, anytime you automate something, you got to maintain it and manage it. Yeah. So you got to be mindful of, is the automation actually going to cause you more overhead? And if you put in an automation that only you know, then that's putting your team under a lot, assuming you work in a team, it's putting your team under a bit of pressure there if that breaks and you're away and no one knows what to do. So also consider, if you build any automation, put some documentation around it, tell your team how to use it. Make sure people have access to edit this, right? Otherwise you're setting yourselves up for a bit of problems. So course, our use cases: bulk updating, sending notifications, emails, Teams. It might be just exporting. And this is the one I struggle with when I go into companies now. They've got Power BI administration, right? Who's got a request process that says, hey, I'd like a workspace. Hey, add this user to this workspace. You can automate all that. So why sit there and process requests for new workspaces and access when you could be trying out Fabric features instead? So you can set up automations. Think about using Forms. So another Microsoft product, Office 365 Forms, captures the workspace name, the username, what role you want to give them, or new workspace, and puts in things. You can put Power Automate behind the scenes to say, hey, validate that they've used the naming convention. Do approvals. You can do approval flows to say, hey, someone has to approve this. And then when it's approved and it comes back, you go, boom, call the Power BI API with the service principal and create the workspace, and then email whoever requested. Your workspace is created. Hands off. That thing can be running and processing requests and access to stuff. Well, you probably want to use security groups, but if you were doing individual access, someone submits a request, hey, I'd like access to this workspace, this report, or this app, or whatever. And you go, is that something I can automate? Yes, it is. So I'll build a request process that says, take that, make sure it's approved, and then go do it. And you can even tell it to write to some log, whether it's a spreadsheet, a SharePoint list, an Azure SQL database, somewhere that says, hey, this automation ran and gave Joe Bloggs access to this workspace, this report with this permission set. Yeah. But you can automate those sorts of things too. Everyone always thinks about the business use case from I've got a report and I need to refresh, I've got data I need to update, add, enter, but they don't necessarily think about, hey, all this day-to-day managing the platform, can I automate all that too? Because that's more like a return on investment to the team managing it, as opposed to return on investment to a end user outside your customer data team. Yeah. Always got to make the data life easier. So we're going to collaborate with Teams. Now, I've done this myself. I used it for proof of concept rollout. I was moving Crystal reports from Crystal reports with a SaaS multi-dimensional, so SQL Server Analysis Services multi-dimensional backend on-prem, to Power BI reporting. And when I did that, I was like, I want to pilot that with end users, but I don't necessarily want to teach those end users how to log into the Power BI service with the two-factor authentication yet. So why not just drop a tab inside Teams And that way they're already logged in because they've single sign-on into Teams.
Yeah.
They're already logged in.
Yeah.
You don't got to teach them all the login experience. You don't got to teach them the navigation experience. You can go straight into just prototyping the report. And then, you do your cultural change wider later to say, all right, now let's tell you actually how to log into the service. Power Query, SQL, or PySpark. For what, Fernando?
I would say depending on purpose and the person's skill level. Yeah. ETL.
Oh, ETL, extract, transform, load. Any tool that works for you is in your budget, have the skill set for. So very much it depends. It's like when people say to me, should I go to Fabric? I say, it depends. Can you do everything you need to do in Fabric in the budget you want with the decision factors you have? Then sure. People that are doing Power BI, they're like, should I go to Fabric? And it's like, no, you don't have to. You can, whilst Power BI is now encompassed in the umbrella of Fabric, you can still use Power BI as you did before with Pro, with Premium, per user. If you're a premium capacity people, those are going to swap to an F capacity for you behind the scenes. So that changes that world. But otherwise, if you're doing import mode, direct query, and you're building reports and you're publishing them, you have no need to switch to Fabric. Don't switch to Fabric. You don't have to. Just use it if it's appropriate to you. It's the same way if you're using Azure Data or AWS, GCP, Databricks, whichever platform you're using for, say you're doing an enterprise data warehouse and all your ETLs are over there. If you're using notebooks in Databricks, you don't have to switch them to Fabric. You don't have to move your whole data estate over. You can have them all where they are and just shortcut the end result into Fabric, or look at mirroring the preview feature to say, hey, I've got my data warehouse sitting in an Azure SQL. I've got all my engineering in Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse or Databricks or whatever the case may be. You don't have to switch all that over to Fabric. You can look at it by all means. It's like, people didn't necessarily swap to Synapse just because it existed. People didn't swap from directory to import with Power BI unless there was a reason. They didn't necessarily swap from SQL Server Analysis Services to Azure Analysis Services to Power BI Premium unless there was a good reason to do that. So always look at, and those reasons are different for every company. If I want to go to Fabric and I have all SQL skills, I might not necessarily use like notebooks, but then the functionality I need might not be there yet because not every functionality exists in Fabric that you may want. It just has a lot, but it doesn't mean it has everything for everyone. But always competitively evaluate your products. Now, I'll keep slamming this through, but by all means, more questions in the chat. Love it. So Power BI with Teams. So we can do this in a number of ways. We can have Power BI as an app, separate app in Teams. You can even ask your Teams tenant administrator to turn it on as a default. There's Power BI as a tab. So think about if you've got channels, Teams groups with channels.
A lot.
If you're just doing a direct chat with your colleague, another report dev within the company, you're like, hey, I just want to run this report by you. Boom, drop it as a tab. You can use the cards. Now, licensing, you do need to be mindful of the licensing requirements when you're doing that. Don't just go willy-nilly and drop it in. So when I did the pilot, I think I started with like 10, 20 users and scaled it up to about 500 of the 20,000 to test it out. But we were using a premium capacity, so I already knew they were licensed to access the reports. So when talking Power BI as an app, that's in that left-hand nav menu, ... and you can pick Power BI. This is if you don't have it installed by default. So of course you can go in, you can add it, you can pin it, but then once you've got it there, you might want to go to your tenant admin and go, hey, can you just make this mandatory for the entire org? And it pretty much renders the Power BI service inside of Teams. So it's already doing your authentication because single sign-on. In Teams, be mindful there if you're going B2B, B2C, cross-tenant. Of course, it's not going to render that because you would have to give it the tenant URL, like the CTID equals blah. At the end of the URL, you don't do that. It's automatically single signs you onto a specific tenant, your main domain tenant. So we can go ahead and we can interact with reports. We can view workspaces. We can even create new reports from here. We can look at apps. We can do all sorts of good things here. So we can go ahead and create a new report. These options will have changed slightly because the screenshot was taken a little whiles back on my demo tenant. If we're doing Power BI as a tab, so that's where I've got here my general channel going on with people, I can select the little plus button, and then from there I select that I want to use Power BI as my tab, and then from that we go into the Power BI. Now we pick either workspace or app, and be mindful that when you do this, it's like a singular page. So it's not like I can go in and say, hey, I want to drop this entire workspace in. You can't do that. You can just say, hey, I want this specific report to be displayed. So if I pick the workspace and I pick a report, so we go, yep, here we go, and I'm logged in as me. So of course it's going to show me the list that I have access to. I go in and pick my workspace, or I go in and pick my app. And then once I've done that, I can also tell it, do you want to post to the channel? So of course, this is on by default. So the behavior you often see is people when trying out this feature, like they might be in a Teams chat with a bunch of people, they try it out and you suddenly see all these messages coming through going, Heidi has added a tab. And if you don't want people to know you're trying this out, untick that option until you figure out exactly what you want.
They didn't have that at the beginning, did they? At the beginning, no. I was looking everywhere. Sue's added a tab. Now she's taken off a tab. Now she's added this file. Now it's been deleted. Painful. Yeah.
It was painful, but of course everyone reads the messages, so they're like, oh my God, what are you doing? So you can untick or tick that as you need. Card. Now, when you this is what we call card. In Teams, this is like the card thing, right? So when you take a Power BI report URL, so service, copy URL, go back into Teams, paste. Way back when, and I hope I've got it in one of these slides, I possibly do, but way back when, really ugly good. Not good, ugly URL, really long URL. app.powerbi.com/groups/the good for the group /report /the good for the report question mark. And now it even says like question mark experience equals Power BI, blah, blah, blah. Yuck. Doesn't tell you like stuff all unless you know how to read that URL. But even then, it's all goods. It's not like it's names. It's not like it's this workspace, that report.
Yeah.
So you can see here, if I was to paste it into Teams, Teams is a bit more savvy and will now render it as a card. So you get a bit more details. But still, that doesn't tell me a heck of a lot. If I was to click the tab, oh, sorry, that was an example of me adding the tab. Oh, talking a bit earlier. There is the card one coming up. I'm like, no wonder I can't see it in my presenter view. I'll rewind slightly. If I add the tab, this is what the tab looked like. It's fully interactive, so I can see my filter pane if it's enabled. I can go through and click the different elements of the report. It's not like a static drop the page on drop the tab into Teams. It's fully interactive there. And of course, you can use the chat feature and comment. Now, I would be mindful and turn this off or don't use this. I've never seen anyone have a legitimate use case where they used it. The reason I say turn it off is often people don't realize this chat is to everyone that sees the report. So they go in and go, hey, the monthly figure of blah doesn't look right. And then someone else is like, what the heck are you talking about? We've got RLS on this report. I can't see that month or that figure. And it's like, oh, yeah, sorry. I'm looking. So it's probably when you're going to use that report chat, be mindful. It's like every report user looking at it, not necessarily specific, one-to-one conversation, or be mindful you don't put data elements into that chat in case it's a security issue. But it's there in case you want to do so. In this case, I'm like working on the report and go, yeah, that looks really good. I like it. Thank you very much, team. Now we talk about cards, right? Now we talk about cards. So you can see here, I've sent myself a chat message and it renders the, I don't know what they call this, the friendly URL display, which just doesn't tell me anything bar that unless I hover over it and get the lovely looking little good. It's handy, but it could be better. Could be better. We can always be better. We love better. So now we look at it. If we drop that URL, this is way better. The card appears and tells us straight away the breadcrumbs. It's from this workspace and it's this report. So now anytime I see that, if for whatever reason Teams didn't render it okay, I can just go to Power BI service and go, okay, I'm looking for the workspace Power BI preview feature check and I'm looking for the customer profitability sample report. That's what that is. So it's way, way, way more helpful to anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
Now, if we use the share feature, so if we're inside the Fabric service, Power BI service, and we go into report, we go into page and we hit share. We've got a couple of options. I can say I want to share this with Teams, and I can put in all my details that want me to sign into Teams. So I go, yep, sign into my matching org, and I put where I want to send it, whether I want to send it to someone, a group, or a channel. But notice it's just that very ugly, unhelpful URL.
Yeah.
Sure, if I click it, it loads as long as I've got access. But let's say I didn't have access. Actually, if you didn't have access, it'll pop up and say, do you want to request access? Enter your message here type thing. But it's just not super helpful. And you can see comparing it to the other options, like if I was to copy paste the URL and actually paste it into Teams is savvy enough to turn it into that card with the breadcrumbs. So it's better off not using the Power BI Service share button, but use the actual copy the URL and paste it directly into Teams. So Teams is great if you want to do pilots, if you want to do collaboration, or you want to do communication of changes. It's also really good when you want to drop new versions, because if people don't know where that report is in the service and you're constantly modifying it, you're doing an initial Power BI rapid development, proof of concept perhaps, you can just drop the tab when you don't want someone to access it, right? Because they don't necessarily know where it came from. So you just drop the tab, you're working on it, or it breaks. So you just say, hey, for today, no report testing required, drop it, work away, and then you can re-add the tab back and go, hey, now you can go look at the tab. So that's our journey. We continue on now, and we're going to go, all good, let's take our board meeting to the next level, because everyone loves the fact that Power BI is freaking awesome, because it is. 5 minutes to wow was its initial slogan. I love it's like 5 minutes to wow, and then the oh crap, how do we convert this to an enterprise solution after that?
Yeah.
What do we
What happens when our data isn't in a lovely CSV, perfectly formatted with no issues?
It takes a lot more than the 5 minutes to wow to figure that out, but still, we love it either way. But if we want to look at putting it in PowerPoint now, because let's say we're doing PowerPoint presentations for our annual board meeting or our executive catch up, or just our management thing.
I think it's brilliant. Power BI in PowerPoint embedded into Teams. Perfect.
Absolutely. So 2 options, static or interactive. So if we do static, we say we want to go into export, PowerPoint, embed an image. It's going to say, do you want to take it with the current values that you're currently filtering or showing, or do you want to not use those filters? And then do you want just the current page or the whole thing? Does our nice little spinny wheel stand by? I'm generating that for you. And then once it's finished, it gives you the Power BI report with all the pages you had selected. The cool one, the first one, will actually show you the breadcrumbs of where that report came from, and just static images. So it's point in time. It might be good to get this and then go drop it in, your Word document if it's a formal submission for something, to your board, or if you're just doing project stats potentially. A lot of people forget they can do statistics on their, things like Jira, Power BI, Azure DevOps work items, anything that's project management based. Anything you can bring into Power BI reports. So if you're doing project tracking, or it might be, you're building a house or whatever, and you can go through the stats of your house build, whatever the case may be, we've got a static option. The other ones are our live option, are interactive. So you do embed live data, and with that, it gives you a specific URL to use with the URL. So you copy the URL and you say, okay, over in PowerPoint, click Power BI. In the ribbon, and then once you do that, it'll ask you for the URL, and then it'll render that URL back at you. Now, this interactive means you have to have access to it. So if someone took this PowerPoint file and sent it around the place, if they don't have access to this Power BI service, that URL, this interactive report will actually error. It won't load. Once it is there, you can click around. So all the demos you've seen earlier are actually me using the PowerPoint interactive, so I don't have to go between service and this, but it's all interactive. So we can go through, we can do our refresh of visuals, we can do our reset and clear it. We can show the filters pane, we can hide the filters pane, we can make it full screen. We can go through and click all the things. The hardest one to remember is the refresh is down the bottom here in this menu, as opposed to the top right, refresh visuals, refresh page. Refresh data, refresh. No, it's refresh visual, or reset to, reset the screen. The use cases, of course, with static, anytime you want to share it, but you don't necessarily want to share with access, or they don't want direct access to the data. Be mindful of security, because as soon as you take something and take it out of the thing that has the security applied, so the Power BI report, only certain people have access. If it's RLS to data, even more restrictive. You take a screenshot and send it, that takes away all that security and sends it to someone who may not have any access. But really good to get you snazzier visuals for any reporting you're doing. Or even if you're putting together a use case for you want funding or something, you can you do snazzy Power BI visuals. Dynamic, it's repeatable, it's refreshable, it's usable. It means, someone can go to that board meeting or your regular monthly managers meeting or even your stand-up meeting for your project, hit the refresh, see how everything's tracking. Really cool. You can explore and interact. It's great for a Q&A. Other interactions, so I'm rapidly running through this in a bit because I've got no time. Power Apps in Teams, Power Automate in Teams, Visio and Power BI. Love the last one. I once did it with a floor plan at work. I took a photo of the floor plan, edited it in the I forget what it's, the SQL BI shape map visual editing thing.
Yeah.
And then integrated it back in. I was like, this is great. I can see, I can find people on the floor. I really wanted to hook it up to a tablet and put the tablet in the office and be like, you are here and that person is there. So you could navigate. Some other things, be mindful of siloed teams, because obviously we've gone across the stack. Sometimes Power Apps and Power Automate is like one team, or it might be business users doing Power Automate, a central data team doing Power BI. So watch out for those silos and how you're going to work around those. Environment, workspace, change and release management. What I mean there is Power Apps and Power Automate, their container is an environment. Power BI container is a workspace. You got to be mindful of how you're going to change and release from a development setting to a production setting. For Power Apps and Power Automate, there's the concept of solutions, where solutions inside those two products, you go, hey, I've got a solution. That solution is this, and you can export it as zip and then re-import it as zip, or you can publish the solution to different environments. And of course, the all-important licensing where everyone needs a PhD, or let's hope someone builds a UB Copilot that can answer all those things. References to learn more. I realize these are hyperlinks. I can send you all the decks.
If you send me, if you're happy to send the PowerPoint, then I've got a GitHub that I can pop it in.
Absolutely.
People can then access it from there.
I'll probably PDF it so that the demos don't work, but I will make sure the links are textual, because I have them sitting in the notes. But yes, and thank you. I apologize if I missed any questions there. I can try and answer them if you're happy to stick around for a bit. You can hit me up on Twitter.
I love all the pictures.
Yes, I changed my hair a lot, so at the moment it's actually long hair, and it's pink with like faded peachy color at the ends. But sometimes people struggle to find me at events, because as Sue saw me at SQL Bits in London, sometimes I'm at SQL Pass in the US, sometimes I'm in India for DPS and New Zealand for Definity. I go around the place, but because I change my hair so often, one year I had purple hair, and I think my Twitter and everything had me with my red hair, and so people were like, where do I find your hair? So I'm like, oh, I've changed hair color.
I know. I just saw you and I saw this amazing vibrant haircut, and I went, that's got to be Heidi. And then went over and I went, hello.
Well, that's earlier when Christian was talking about the Fabric Live Learn. I think in the first Fabric Live Learn, I have completely different colored hair. It's like multicolored and darker. And then when someone saw me at SQL, they're like looking at me like, is that you? Were you on the Live Learn? And they looked at me and I said, oh, can I help? And they're like, did you do a Live Learn? I said, oh yeah, I changed hair color, but it is me.
Yeah. Well, you've had a few people have had to leave, but they've just said superb session and great session, and so much chit chat in the chat. And fabulous, Heidi, absolutely fabulous.
Look at that. We've got answers to our thank you so much. Notes and links to share. Perfect. Look at that. I don't even have to share the links. I'm hopeless with names, hence why I don't say about
Takimi. I think it's Takimi. Takimi is brilliant. She captures all of our URLs for us each time. Right, I'm going to stop recording, but that was awesome, just awesome. So I'm going to stop.
I need to fix that, Joe. I'll get it to work.
I think considering that, the whole subscription died on you before. Anyway, stopping recording. Right, everyone, if you want to unmute and speak, it's we will let Heidi go in a moment, but that was brilliant. I think Fernando
great session, Heidi. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
You're most welcome. Great to see you virtually in person, I should say. I see some of you all online, but I don't get to see you necessarily in person. So it's great to see you all on Teams. And thanks for
If you're watching at the end, I'm sorry it cut short, but we literally didn't stop talking, so there wasn't space to have a nice finish at the end. But I hope you've enjoyed. If you are watching this at the end, please pop a note into the video because it'd be quite interesting into the chat below. Bye bye.